Welcome to Disability Law for Railroad Workers.
Hello and welcome to the podcast with Burnett Driskill Attorneys. Joining us today are attorneys Sciolaro and Andrea, Wehner, disability attorneys at Burnett Driskill who represent clients throughout Kansas and Missouri. Kyle and Andrea focus on Social Security disability claims at both the administrative and appellate levels, helping individuals navigate a system that can feel confusing, technical, and often discouraging. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host, and today's episode is about symptoms, how they are evaluated in disability claims, and why some legitimate claims are still denied. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Before we get into the symptoms themselves, I want to give you each a chance to share a bit about your work in disability law and what led each of you to focus on how these claims are evaluated. Andrea, do you want to start? And then we'll kick it over to Kyle.
Sure, thank you. I actually started in this practice when I graduated from law school and passed the bar here in Missouri. And I've been very pleased to be able to continue in this area of law my entire practice, other than the time I spent with my children at home. And I have seen tremendous changes over the years in the way these cases are evaluated by Social Security and the difficulties that we face, and also some additional things that have happened that make it a little easier to show disability.
I've been with Burnett Driskill for about 10 years now. My background before that for several years was in criminal defense. I spend most of my time here with our federal court practice. So claimants are clients who have already received denials all the way through the administrative law judges and all the way through the appeals council. Those cases we take to federal court. So there's a lot of work to be done at that level and looking at subjective symptoms and claims in general.
And when people hear that a disability claim was denied, many assume that it means the decision maker didn't believe them. In reality, how are symptoms actually evaluated in these disability cases?
Well, a lot of folks can't help but feel discouraged or feel like someone is calling them a liar when their claim is denied. And that's especially the case if they've received a denial from an administrative law judge already. These things are really long. They're anywhere from 10 to 30, pages, and they talk about almost everything in the claim. And there can be a lot of negative stuff in there. But generally what you're not going to see in one of those decisions is the judge saying, I think this person's a malingerer. I think this person has poor character. I think they're lying about their symptoms and they have no credibility. Instead, it's going to be more of a game of poking holes and finding things that are inconsistent with one another in the record. And when you have a 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 page record full of someone's files, it's not that hard sometimes to find inconsistencies over, here and here, especially if they're several years apart, because these claims just drag on for such a long period of time. So in fancy legal speak, they've carefully avoided credibility, and in fact, in 2016, got rid of credibility analysis altogether, so that they're no longer looking at people's character in that way, and instead they're just evaluating whether the intensity and limiting effects of their symptoms are consistent or inconsistent with the record as a whole.
And you mentioned the word inconsistency several times. I'm curious, what kinds of inconsistencies tend to raise red flags, even when someone is being honest about their condition? Can you be more specific?
I'll let Andrea comment on this too, but some of the things that are really low-hanging fruit and easy for the administrative law judges to pick up on are things like going on international vacations or having kind of not well-documented work on the side, that it's not clear what exactly you're doing, what you're getting paid for, and where the earnings records are. Or if you just have hobbies that are insanely demanding and all of that's well documented and all this stuff is what it is, they would find inconsistencies with some of that.
One thing I've seen consistently in the medical record is a claimant will tell their doctor that they love, for example, to hunt. Well, they're talking about that's what they like to do. That doesn't mean they're doing it now. That was their hobby when they were able to do it. Or, for example, I was a plumber. I do plumbing, but they're speaking in the present tense about work they did in the past tense. So it just sometimes that can just be misconstrued in the medical record, and we just have to clarify that when it actually gets to the point where we're with the administrative law judge.
And you mentioned medical records, so let's elaborate on that one as well. How do medical records, personal statements, or daily life details that you mentioned, how do those all work together to either support or weaken their symptoms in the case?
One really straightforward example is that medical records are obviously really good evidence that you were seen and treated by a medical provider. So if you're not getting the level of care that the administrative law judge thinks would be appropriate for someone who is claiming such severe subjective symptoms, so for example, if someone has a spine problem and maybe they aren't undergoing the physical therapy and epidural injections and things like that the administrative law judge thinks they should, they might even try to find an inconsistency with something like that.
And it's easy for example, for a claimant to become discouraged. There's nothing I can do to get better. And we need to kind of let them know from the beginning, it's still important to get what treatment you can. It's just really important that you're doing the best you can to make yourself better.
It makes me think there's more to this. Like, what are decision makers actually trying to learn when they're asking about everyday activities like household tasks, caring for pets, or maybe somebody's hobbies?
And that's where it depends a lot on what our client, the claimant, alleges in their claim. So, for example, if they're alleging that there are headaches, then the decision makers a lot of times are going to be looking for inconsistencies and symptoms about how you deal with those headaches. So, this is an example actually that I was just looking at recently from a client where the comment was, or maybe it came up in wherever it came from. So, the claimant does not require a dark or quiet room during their examinations, as an example of why maybe their headaches weren't as severe as alleged. So in a back case, it might be totally different, but in that case where headaches were a primary issue, that was one of the examples used.
A whole big significant part of what we do when we have a hearing before an administrative law judge is have the claimant tell their story. And that's with particular reference to their activities of daily living, what they're doing from the time they get up in the morning to the end of the day, how they're trying to manage their symptoms, the things they're able to do, the things they're unable to do, the price they pay if they overdo. It's really part of this narrative story we present to the judge to help them have a better understanding of the claimant's limitations.
I understand. And then in your experience, how often are claims denied not because someone is exaggerating, but because the record doesn't clearly connect their limitations to the inability to work?
I'd say that's very frequent. That's something we deal with all the time. Kyle, I'm sure you have some.
I think that a lot of the time that's actually why claims that are denied, or why they're usually even denied. People experience pain and anxiety and fatigue in a lot of different ways, and it's not fair at all to jump to the conclusion that they're exaggerating without a look at some of those factors. It takes a lot of work and investigation in a claim and really getting to know someone before you can come to the conclusion that they are exaggerating. And that's why they're really supposed to look at the entire file and determine if the record as a whole supports the kind of allegations that the client has, not just an individual activity of daily living or something like that.
And there's a lot of room for interpretation. So from a decision maker's perspective, what separates a record that feels reliable and complete from one that may feel unclear or even contradictory?
Maybe one of the classic examples is a client who has a strong, consistent earnings record that shows that they're willing to work as long as they're able to. That's something that it's some ALJs, administrative law judges, look at more than others, but that's a kind of a classic example. Another classic example would be whether the claimant has the support of one of their treating physicians, especially if the treating physician, that if their opinion is consistent with all the other evidence in the record, then it's especially powerful.
And we take claimants at the application level. So that's the very beginning of the process. And it typically is a long process. There's the initial level, the reconsideration level, and then the administrative law judge level. In the first two levels, they complete a function report, an activities of daily living statement. And we try to help them keep consistency in that. They complete it. In both cases, we try to get them a copy of their original one when they complete the second one with any things that have changed in the interim. And then finally, by the time we have the hearing in front of the judge, it's actually the testimony itself to the judge that's of the greatest importance.
And something that people maybe need to hear, but it's hard to hear and sounds kind of crazy, is that these decisions, even though they're intensely personal and about that particular client, in some ways they're all the same. If they're going to deny a claim, one of the things basically that they must do is find that their allegations are inconsistent with the record. So every single decision that's denied is going to contain this kind of analysis. So Andrea mentioned the function reports, and really most of these administrative law judges are going to go through in some detail those function reports and compare them internally and externally and go through all that stuff. They have to.
And as someone is trying to be helpful, as you mentioned, wanting to be sharing all the details, how can someone unintentionally undermine their own symptoms or how things are working within their body? How can they undermine what it is that they're trying to express during this process, even while trying to be cooperative and thorough?
One way that people oftentimes don't know what they're doing with is when they describe their past work, they go into too much detail about things that they saw themselves as being really good at and really skilled at, and maybe they kind of embellish their skills a little bit and make themselves, sometimes it's just hard for claimants to accept that they really were not able to do the functions of their job anymore. They weren't, and their health was the reason for that. And that there are all kinds of conditions that affect people's ability to work. So there's nothing unusual necessarily about that, but sometimes people don't convey that information about their jobs, especially in the best way.
And another big problem that we have, sometimes we try to keep them focused at the front end with this, is understating the physical demands of their past work. For example, you have a big burly guy, truck driver, he says, I hardly had to lift anything. But then if you get down into the weeds, he was lifting all kinds of things, heavy chains. I mean, it's inherently a heavy job. So we just have to be really careful that they think about what was I really doing in a typical day on this job.
Sometimes people also slip up and they kind of give varying accounts about how much or how little they're able to do something. And maybe that's just because when they filled out the form on a particular day, or when they made a comment to their doctor on a particular day, things were just really, really bad for them that day. And then on another time, they weren't so bad. But if you go in and you say, well, I'm able to stand and walk all day and I don't have any trouble at all. And then another day, there's a note in there that says you can only stand or walk for a couple hours a day. Now you've created an inconsistency in the record that is just easy for an administrative law judge to target as an inconsistency. And a lot of times that's enough.
And we're well-intentioned. We don't mean to do that, but we think of instances or moments rather than thinking of the big picture. I can see how that would happen. For someone who feels discouraged after a denial, what's important to understand before deciding what to do next? And can they do anything after a denial?
That's a great question. So we try to tell people when they come in at the initial level, this is a very long process. This is going to take a long time. There are many, many steps. And when we take somebody on, we're taking them on for the long haul. We're going to look down the road as long as we have to. So that means getting a denial at initial, a denial at reconsideration, a denial from the ALJ, a denial from the Appeals Council, and then proceeding on to federal court. So we really do try to build the case for the long haul and have the client aware that this is not going to happen quickly.
And at the early levels, especially at the initial and reconsideration levels, they're going to see decisions, and they're really frustrating to read because 80-90% of it is just form language. And then the last couple paragraphs maybe have a few things that are customized to the claim, sort of, but they're also kind of awkward and sort of computer generated sort of stuff. So you read this and feel like, is my claim really reduced to this kind of gobbledygook on paper? And it's only a little later on, once you're before a judge and have the full file and everything, to see where you can make a little bit more sense of what was going on behind the scenes and try to address some of that stuff and respond to it.
Andrea, Kyle, thank you so much for being with me today. And folks, that's it for today's episode, the podcast with Burnett Driskill Attorneys. If you're feeling confused or discouraged after a disability denial and want to better understand how your claim is evaluated, you can reach out to burnettdriscoll.com for more information. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and please share this with someone who may benefit today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.